Well, there you are. Thank you so much for staying with us here on Village Square Africa. Now, amidst a backdrop of anticipation and concerns, Zimbabwe's crucial presidential and parliamentary elections have entered their second day. However, the proceedings have been marked by significant delays, particularly in the capital city, Harare, casting a shadow over the electoral process. The repercussions of these delays have led to an extension of the voting period, a decision aimed at ensuring that every eligible voter has the opportunity to participate. However, the main opposition contender, Nelson Chamisa, is accusing the President Emmerson Mnangagwa and the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission of intentional manipulation. Let's get you the latest on Zim's elections as we delve into the unfolding event here on the square today. I am Kemeni Amano. You are most welcome. Joining our gathering today is Richard Runyararo Mahomva. He's a Zimbabwean academic and director of the International Communication Services in the government. He's joining us from Harare, Zimbabwe. A little later, we'll have some observers also join us. But right now, let's talk to Richard. Richard, thank you so much for your patience. You're welcome to the square.
Thank you for inviting me for this.
Indeed. Richard, how about we start with what's happening on day 2 of elections? What is happening in Harare, where most of the delays occurred?
Well, of course, there were these delays which were mainly logistically influenced. That is something that has since been noted. And but beyond that, you'd notice that there's been an extension of the voting period because there's been this a great commitment to enable everyone who's legitimate to vote to be able to do so. And one would agree with me that the current experience, the excitement around the voting process is a courtesy of the generous opening up of the political environment for all political players and citizens. And we are recording also a high degree of peace in terms of the voting process by the citizens. There hasn't been any reported incident of violence of late. So I think that is also quite important. Election observers are doing much of their work, and there's so much media coverage as far as the government is concerned. There was a memo that was released indicating that there's more than 20 newsrooms that are covering the Zimbabwean election, expressing the sense of openness that is prevailing as far as the coverage of the election and observation is concerned.
I see. But these delays, if we could talk about them a bit longer, very unusual in that even as at 7 p.m. last night, some centers still did not have logistics to or elections materials to conduct the voting process, reportedly. The reason ZEC gives for this, I want to hear your thoughts about that courts processes or court challenges prior to the elections caused those logistical delays. Have you been able to reconcile the two?
Well, it's the delays are not only culminating as a result of the court processes and the subsequent delay in the printing of the vote. You'd also notice that there was also, in some instances, a duplication of candidates as far as the nomination process was concerned on the part of the opposition. In some instances, you had late nominations, especially in the case of Bulawayo province, which is the second largest city in our country and the metropolitan province altogether. So you've got this cross-cutting, cross-cutting and inter-party influence to this delay, but prominently being as a result of the court disputes that were also put forward by some opposition players.
I see. Richard, would now have a Nozipo Zipo Moyo join us. She's Executive Director at Africa Kiburi. She is on the field observing things in Zimbabwe as far as this election is concerned. Zipo, thank you for joining our conversation today. Tell us what you have observed day 2 of the elections.
Are a bit smoother, but of course there's a lot of confusion because no one actually thought this would be the most disorganized election post-colonial. So there's a lot of confusion because there's been a lot of fake news. Remember, yesterday before we started an election, there are allegations of FARS, an organization that had to stick posters that the election, no one should vote, the election is rigged with Nelson Chamisa's logo. And even when the presidential letter came, the initial one that went through social media did not have a statutory instrument number. Therefore, people are in a space of confusion whether it was true or not true. And for the record, not everyone listens to our local news. So it's going on smoothly, but a lot could have been expected. Thank you.
I see. Let's take with the accusations that Nelson Chamisa has made already. In fact, prior to the elections, one of the presidential candidates who dropped out has said the election is choreographed. There was no point in running, for which reason he had dropped out of the elections. Throughout this election, Nelson Chamisa, since yesterday, has also been making the same point about intentional manipulation of the elections in favor of the ZANU-PF. I'll stick with you, Nozipo. Are there justifications for these yet?
ZEC has not been transparent and will question its credibility. I mean, how do you print election ballot papers on election day? That should be a highlight. What confusion happened? We expected ZEC to be prepared all along. People do not come because allegations are coming in that through the ZANU-PF militia and police spokesperson, because if you look at social media videos of people who approach people in this desk by FARS, secret services, this was already planned. It was known that election ballot papers would be delayed. And the question is, how does a whole body in 5 years knowing what's going to happen? And I like to allude to what my brother, Mr. Richard, mentioned. There have been court processes. And we know where we stood with double candidates or not. So there is no excuse to say you're printing a ballot paper on the day. So I would concur with people that there's something fishy, and it does not make sense that a whole electoral body would print papers on the day of election. Because the question is, if you're printing ballot papers on the day of elections, how do you consolidate who has those serial numbers? There have been issues of the voters' roll. Why are you delaying the process? Because it's always good that all parties involved in this election know what is happening. So for me, the mere reason that ZEC is printing ballot papers on the day of election is ridiculous.
I see. Richard, do you think that Chamisa is speaking too soon, or perhaps ZEC has itself to blame for the credibility issues that have been raised so far? Richard, that's for you. I was asking whether or not you think Chamisa and all those who are calling the electoral process a sham perhaps are speaking too soon, or ZEC has itself to blame for all the credibility concerns that have been raised so far? I'm not sure Richard can hear us, but perhaps I should have...
Hello?
Richard, can you hear us? I don't think Richard can hear us, but Nozipo is still here with us. Nozipo, if you could take that question again for me. You talked earlier about how ZEC hasn't been transparent, obviously putting the blame on ZEC. But is there anything ZEC could do at this point to give a semblance of credibility to the electoral process ongoing right now?
ZEC has been known over the years to be a weapon, a pawn used by the ruling party. We just need independent institutions, from the judiciary in Zimbabwe to the media, also to ZEC Electoral Commission. We need ZEC to be an independent institution so that we can trust it, because it does not make sense if it seems to be working in cohorts with the ruling party. So for me, it's not even about ZEC. For us as citizens is a pocket in the ruling party. It's not an independent institution. The challenge we have with Zimbabwe outside the ruling party is that we do not have independent and strong institutions. And ZEC is an example of how you try to run a free and fair election without credibility.
Well, so someone would argue that perhaps we should give it time for the process to conclude, and then some of these allegations or accusations could be raised. It would seem that ZEC is not being given benefit of doubt here. What would you say to such arguments?
Garbage in, garbage out. Whatever is going to be processed and whatever is going to come after these results is an outcome for all the mess that happened from the day of election. You cannot say you're baking a cake and say you put the wrong ingredients and then you say probably let's give it enough time in the oven and we see what comes out. This is a mess already, because we cannot account for the ballot papers. Let me take you back to 2018. To date, even when Chamisa went to argue the presidential results, to date, ZEC has never released any evidence to highlight exactly the percentage and the demographics of how the president won. To date, and we're on the second election. When that thing went to court, when Chamisa challenged, to date, people should not forget that we have no idea how we can consolidate the demographics, how the president won to date. So in these whole 5 years, it seems they're getting worse. ZEC is getting worse. ZEC is getting to the gutter. It's showing us they're incompetent. They have been incompetent, and they've confirmed with this next election, with this current election. Sorry, thank you.
I see. Let's try Richard again. Richard, if you can hear us, I was asking you whether or not people may be speaking too soon against the electoral process and should give ZEC the benefit of doubt.
Look, if ZEC was not a credible entity, would not have political parties participating in the ZEC process. The challenge that we have in our country is that there is a selective appreciation of the functions of ZEC. Contrary to the set provisions, we have seen certain members of the opposition and civil society having premature celebrations of outcomes in certain sections of Bulawayo and in Harare. You are also witnessing a situation whereby there's a disproportionate attack on the logistical crisis that prevailed yesterday, which, as we are speaking, has been resolved. In fact, it was resolved as early this morning and as late as last night. So you've got a disproportionate attack on a matter that has already been resolved. But we should look at the fundamental causes of this mess, that it was the disorganization of the opposition political parties that culminated in so many, court cases. And sometimes you witness situations whereby they were deploying about 3 candidates in a single constituency, and that created that fundamental mess. So we cannot begin to talk about the delays in the logistical delays without also exclusively fingering the opposition's contribution into this particular issue. And the narrative about rigging is not a very new one in terms of the Zimbabwean political discourse. It has been a very prevalent narrative, especially from the opposition. And you've got an opposition that would front an argument of rigging against a backdrop of clear realities of disorganization. We are talking of a political opposition that doesn't have structures. We are talking of an opposition political party that didn't even go to Congress and wants to look at the disorganization of ZEC and wants to prime that as
Richard, here's my question to you then. If what you're saying,
which is an outright defeat from ZANU-PF.
Indeed. So if what you're saying be the case, why then did ZEC tell the people of Zimbabwe that it was ready to conduct the elections as should? At no point did ZEC say we have logistical challenges because of these court challenges, except on the day of elections when it was supposed to be delivering these electoral materials to polling centers.
Look, this issue didn't happen. Let me put things into context. This primarily happened in Harare and Bulawayo. And with the results that are currently being released through unofficial means, there are no indications of ZANU-PF's predominant victory as it stands. So it means that we only had a logistical challenge, a national logistical challenge. That is number one. If there was any manipulation that was supposed to come out of that process, we would be witnessing very strange results in favor of ZANU-PF. So if we are to think with the end in mind, what we have right now is a process that has not been manipulated. Those insinuations of manipulation of the process are just but dead propaganda narratives that are emanating from an opposition party that is already anticipating its outright defeat and is setting an agenda that should prepare foreign audiences who are not familiar with the Zimbabwean context to think that the electoral process has been manipulated. And to re-emphasize my point in that respect, if these delays were supposed to culminate in the manipulation of the results, we should have been seeing strange results in favor of ZANU-PF. And if that is not happening, it means that there was no manipulation of the process in Harare and in Bulawayo. Yet these issues, even in America, where the electoral website was hacked, let's not set too high a bar of standards for ourselves and not leave room for potential mishaps.
I'll take a quick reaction from Nozipo. Nozipo, if you were listening to my quick chat with Richard, Richard is saying that the opposition, it's, for lack of a better description, is only saying these to sway the people of Zimbabwe, that there could be credibility issues with the elections, but ZEC is doing the best it can, given all the court challenges that the opposition had brought against ZEC in the process. That's just by way of summary, in case you didn't hear us. What are your thoughts about this?
I'm happy that Mr. Richard is confirming the incompetence of ZEC. He has actually affirmed that they had delays on the day, logistical national delays, and that is just confirmation on the incompetence of ZEC. And we cannot say, let us not set the bar too high when we have a very competitive election. And for me, it's not even about political party ZANU or CC, but you cannot have a government and an institution creating confusion, problem, then they come up a few hours and we want to say the president noticed the errors and he has put an extra day for election. Why are we celebrating solutions coming from problem creators? The ruling government and ZEC have proved incompetence, basically, and that is what my brother confirmed, as he said it was a national logistical problem. Thank you.
I see. Richard and Nozipo will take a breather. When we come back, well, my understanding is that we have to end our conversation, but just before we go, just one last thing on issues of credibility raised around ZEC's conduct of the election and generally, you know, the incumbent's supporter base conduct. We're told about how desks have been set up outside polling stations, allegedly collecting data of people who have voted and asking them who they're voting for. People have described this as intimidation of the people. Richard, just quickly react to that for me, and then we'll wrap up our conversation now.
Okay, I think the other very important issue is that whilst we may have agreements that ZEC has challenges, which my colleague has decided to dramatically label as incompetency, I think it's not correct to associate the incompetency of ZEC, as she alleges, with ZANU-PF's manipulation of the electoral process. I think that is not a very correct position. It makes it appear as if ZANU-PF is not at the receiving end of the so-called incompetence of ZEC, because with these delays that happened, these delays also affected ZANU-PF voters in Bulawayo and Harare. This did not have a single direct effect on opposition followers. So I think that is a very important that needs to be stated clearly. Well, about these guys that were recording names, whatever, I haven't come across that. I'm hearing it now for the first time, so therefore I cannot comment about that. It's actually news. I'm hearing it right now, yeah.
I hate that we have to end our conversation. There's so much to talk about. But Richard and Nozipo, thank you so much for the time that you have shared with us. The conversations around Zimbabwe's elections will continue here on News Central TV. You stick and stay with us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be right back. Don't go away.